Melanie, my wife, cheated on me with not one, but three. James, cocky as he is, was having fun with her while Mark was somewhere in the back like it was some sort of jocular competition. And there was Bob finishing up like he was just cleaning up after himself. This was the moment I knew it was time for my carefully thought out revenge. But let's start over, back to the beginning. I'm not even sure when it all started, but I wasn't completely blind. After 10 years together, you can't help but notice small changes. Melanie began to move away gradually. At first she was skipping our Friday dinners, forgetting simple things like how much I love my coffee, and not even saying, "I love you," like she used to. At first I thought it was just life. You know how it goes, work becomes difficult, routine eats away at relationships. Maybe I wasn't the best man myself. But then I began to notice something that could not be ignored. Late returns home became too frequent. Some kind of marketing meeting or client presentation that always seems to drag on late at night. I could still put up with it, but what worried me the most was how she began to behave with her phone. She always kept it with her as if it were her personal secret. Every time a message came, she immediately grabbed the phone and hid it, not letting me even see who wrote. I tried to calm myself and not think that it was something serious, but suspicions grew. One day, when she left her phone on the kitchen table, I saw a message light up on the screen. My heart beat faster. I knew this was the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. I picked up the phone and what I saw confirmed all my worst fears. The messages were right there in plain sight, like she wasn't even worried I might see it or thought I was too naive to check. James, Mark, and Bob were the same people I talked to over the weekend, my friends. We drank together, shared our affairs, and here they were exchanging dirty messages with my wife. James was bragging about how good she was in bed, how he was enjoying what was mine. "Can't wait for next time, last time was incredible," he wrote. Mark was also there with his direct message, "It's my turn to star." Bob? He just sent a picture of his instrument, without any words. My body froze in place, my fingers gripped the phone, and everything in my chest froze with indignation. But instead of exploding or screaming, I felt a cold, silent anger. This anger seeped into my every muscle, every breath. And the more I felt him, the more my focus grew on one thing: I wanted revenge, but not in a fit of chaotic rage. I wanted it to be clearly planned, down to the last detail. Now they were going to pay for it, and I already knew how to do it. I have prepared a trap. The next evening, Melanie remembered again something about the late dinner with the clients. I kissed her on the cheek as usual, told her I was staying the night at a friend's, even though it was a lie. As soon as she left the house, I went down to the garage. I had some old glue left over there that I bought for a floor project but never used. Today it will find its application. I took this glue, calm and focused, and went upstairs. He began to work his way from room to room, checking carefully to make sure nothing looked suspicious. The cameras were the first step. I wasn't going to miss a single detail. I set them up around the bed, carefully choosing the angles to capture every movement. Then came the turn of the glue. I imagined their smug faces as I rubbed a thick layer of glue on the bed frame, under the sheets, along the headboard. The hands carefully smeared the glue on the places that they will definitely touch. I almost laughed at the thought of how they would squirm during this act and they realized they couldn't move. The next evening I sat in the car with the engine off, the only sound was my own breathing. My hand firmly held the steering wheel, my fingers turned white, but I was in no hurry. Patience was the main thing. I've been waiting for this moment and now is not the time to lose control. At 11 o'clock in the evening I saw headlights. James drove up to our house in his old car, as he had done more than once. A few minutes later, Mark and Bob arrived, calmly, not trying to hide anything. They were as confident as ever, treating it as just another ordinary evening. They had no idea that this time things would be different. They laughed as they walked up to the door of my house as if it were their own. But this evening everything was different. Little did they know, they were walking straight into a trap. I waited a bit, taking deep breaths, calming the storm inside me, and got out of the car. He carefully and quietly walked along the path to the house. No lights below, everything as I expected. All the action took place upstairs. I slipped through the door without making a sound. The house was gloomy and quiet, only muffled sounds coming from above. I already knew what I would see there, but listening to it was another shock to reality. The sounds of their pleasure cut through me like sharp knives. Keep calm. I climbed the stairs like a robot, slowly, carefully, as if walking on a thread. The door to our bedroom was open and I could see enough not to be seen. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched what was happening. Melanie, my wife, was with two at once. James roughed her up like it was some sick game and Mark went about his business while Bob stood off to the side completing his move. It looked like the most disgusting video imaginable, but it wasn't a movie. This was my life, my reality. Blood rushed to my head, every instinct screaming to rush in and end it, but I held back. Instead, I went down the hall where I left the bucket. I've seen enough. The bucket in my hands seemed heavier than a moment ago. I moved towards the door, each step careful, confident, my boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Their voices could be heard even here, laughter, groans, sounds that stick in your memory like a song you hate but can't stop listening to. Without thinking, I grabbed the door handle and forced it open. "What the," was all James managed to say before the bucket's contents, a thick, grayish goo, splashed across the room, landing on their tangled bodies with a wet splash, drowning out all other words. It was chaos that exploded like a bomb. Melanie screamed, making a muffled, panicked sound, trying to wriggle away, but it was too late. Clay was already in action, fixing her and the three fools she had chosen to humiliate in their obscene poses. James's face went from shock to pure panic. "Shit, John, what are you doing, man?" Jack shouted something obscene, trying to pull himself away from Melanie, but the glue was working fast, too fast. The more they moved, the worse it got. "I can't get out. I'm stuck." James was shaking, but it didn't matter. His body was literally glued to hers as if it had been welded together. Jack, just as helpless, just gritted his teeth, trying in vain to break free, stuck deep in his role. But Bob was worst of all. His face turned red as he tried to pull his banana out of her mouth, but all that came out was a gasp, the glue holding it securely there, sealing it. "Damn it!" Jack shouted in despair. "What have you done, man?" I stood there with my arms crossed, not even blinking. Their naked bodies jostled against each other, each attempt to escape only enthralling them more. James was breathing hard, sweat running down his forehead. Melanie met my eyes and let out another muffled scream, gasping for breath as Bob was stuck in her mouth. Some of her hair stuck to the sheet, thick strands tangled on her back, her thighs clumped together in hideous lumps. Her ideal world was crumbling before her eyes. I stood there feeling relieved, as if I had shed a weight I had been carrying for years. They were squirming now, trying to break free from the glue, but it was no use. James was red with anger, veins standing out on his neck as if he still couldn't believe what was happening. Jack was still muttering something stupid like, "It's not what it seems, is it?" as if that made any difference now. And Bob? He just stared at me, his eyes wide open, like a deer in headlights. I always thought he was the smartest of them all. But, as it turned out, no. Melanie was the real target. She was stuck there, her face pale, doll-like eyes darting between me and the others. Her lips moved, but at first there was no sound. I didn't care what she had to say. Instead, a cold pleasure penetrated deeper and deeper into me, like ice sinking in water. "You bastard," she finally managed to whisper, struggling against the glue that kept her on the bed, naked, helpless, miserable. I just watched, letting her drown in her own powerlessness. "John, please, let us go," her voice was shaking with panic now, but it didn't move me. I pulled out my phone, completely ignoring her pleas. Her betrayal was loud, explosive. And now they were just empty sounds to me. The call signal rang in my ear. I almost hoped that one of my friends' wives wouldn't pick up the phone. Maybe Linda, she was always the one who stayed away from us. Kira, I said as soon as I heard the answer on the other end, without emotion, without extra words. You should come. John, what's going on? She asked, confused. James probably didn't share his plans for the evening. Just come. James is here. You should see it. I did not wait for a flurry of questions, hung up the phone and dialed the next number. Melanie let out a loud scream, now her words were desperate. John, what are you doing? I was calm. Calmer than in months, maybe in years. I finally felt like I was in control. Linda, Jack is here at my house, I said into the receiver. If you don't care about him, come here immediately. By the time I reached Susan, the scene in front of me was simply absurd, entwined bodies, red faces, all trying to break free from this sticky trap. They have not yet understood what is happening. They still thought that they could somehow get out of this situation. Stupid. After finishing the last call, I put the phone in my pocket and looked at them. And that's all. Bob snapped, his voice hoarse. You just stand here and call our wives? Like some kind of pervert? Yes, I answered shortly. Their eyes hadn't fully realized what was going to happen next, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't have to wait long. I sat downstairs listening to the seconds tick by, feeling each minute bring the moment of truth closer. I knew it was only a matter of time before they arrived, and sure enough, less than 15 minutes after my calls, I heard screeching tires outside the house. Kira arrived first, followed by Linda. Susan didn't delay either. I heard them burst into the house, their voices already full of surprise. John. Kira's voice echoed across the corridor. Where are you? I remained silent, knowing they would follow at the sound of the commotion above. And, one by one, I heard them coming up the stairs. I didn't move. Now this was their show. As soon as they reached the top of the stairs, all was quiet. I could clearly picture that moment in my head, like a frame from a skewed photograph. James is still inside Melanie, Jack is glued to her behind with that goofy expression on his face, and Bob, or rather his mouth, is still glued to her lips. Their bodies looked horribly clumsy, like a living nightmarish work of art. And then there was a scream. What the? Oh my God! Linda's voice struck Jack's ears first of all. You idiot! How could you? But Kira was the first to act. She lunged at James, her face burning with rage. Her hand flew sharply into his face, and the slap was so loud that it echoed across the room, leaving a red mark on his cheek. He tried to say something, anything, but his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. All he could manage were faint stutters. You piece of trash, she spat in his face, looking like she might hit him again. You didn't just betray me, you did it to this abomination. Melanie barely managed to squeak, her eyes pleading with me as she lay under the weight of 3 men. Her mouth was full, and unapologetic. Linda took a step back, stunned, her eyes widening when she saw Jack. Glued. Jack. Really? You disgusting piece of... Linda, damn it. I don't know. Don't you know? She laughed bitterly. You seem to understand perfectly well what you are doing, sticking to this evil. Jack looked as if he wanted to disappear underground, but it was impossible. His naked body remained glued in place, forcing him to thrash around helplessly. Susan stepped forward, tears streaming down her face but her hands clenched into fists. If Kira slapped James, Susan decided to go harder, she punched Bob in the chest with all her might. It wasn't too much of a blow, but Bob groaned in pain, his body twitching convulsively, pulling Melanie up behind him. You're just a, damn it, traitor, Bob. Susan choked out tears. After all we've been through, you do this? Bob could barely get a word out, but whispered, I'm sorry, dear. And then chaos erupted in the room, screams, tears, accusations and insults flew in the air, their betrayals were exposed, literally. And my worthless wife, she didn't even manage to apologize. Her face, covered with tears, with swollen cheeks and red eyes, looked pitiful. Bob, glued to her lips, finally silenced her, but even if she could have spoken, I doubted I would have heard the apology I was waiting for. I crossed my arms, watching with cold detachment. Melanie was trying to move, to break free, to do anything, her eyes constantly searching for my gaze as if she was expecting me to do something. Maybe she thought I would come and fix everything. No, let her stay there, it was over for me. Linda's face contorted with rage, her every word laced with hatred. You damn pigs. I gave you everything and you decided to throw our marriage away for her. Jack looked down, howling piteously like a beaten dog. He mumbled something, perhaps an apology, but Linda cut him off sharply. Shut up, Jack. Her nails digging into the sheets, she yanked him off the bed as if that would snap him out of this whole hideous scene. Between sobs, Susan continued to scream at Bob, her fists continuously pounding his back as far as she could reach. I hate you. You should have loved me. I love Susan, please let me explain. Bob's voice was barely audible, every word laced with desperation. No matter how hard he tried, his body remained in an awkward position bent over Melanie, who was pinned beneath him. Kira, who was pacing back and forth trying to calm down, glanced at me. She spat in James' direction but turned to me, her voice like broken glass. How long did you know that? Long enough, I replied simply, meeting her gaze for a second before looking back at Melanie, who was now sobbing like a baby. They're all, damn, sick, Kira hissed. I nodded. There were no disputes here. Linda abruptly went to the bedside table, snatching the lamp from it. In an instant, she smashed it on the floor, shards of glass flying across the room. Jack shuddered, probably expecting the next one to hit him. You never deserved me, she turned to me. John, what are you going to do? Calmly, simply, I shrugged and pulled out my phone. That's it. I raised my hand and started writing again. The flash of the phone reflected from Bob's exhausted face, which now had tears on it. Please, John, James's voice sounded like a crippled dog from the corner of the room. Shut up, I said calmly, my voice belonging to me for the first time in weeks, maybe months. She made her choice, I said, pointing the phone in Melanie's direction. They all did. Melanie shook her head furiously, but that only caused more of Bob's dirt to smear over her cheek. Her sobs were muffled, honestly, it was even a relief to my ears. While the men tried to come up with their pathetic excuses, I just stood there feeling left out. It was their porridge and I had nothing to do with it anymore. I am filing for divorce, Kira blurted out, not looking at James with even a hint of pity. You're a damn disgrace. Linda pushed the chair to the other side of the room, its metal legs creaking on the floor. You're going to rot in hell after this, Jack. You're going to rot. Susan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her tears giving way to cold rage. You were never good enough for me, Bob. Now I know it. I just kept shooting, kept breathing, didn't even think to get any closer. The camera captured everything from that place well, the chaos, the tears, the pleas, and the pitiful excuses. In the frame, I caught the horror in Melanie's eyes, she looked at me with a pleading look. She was shaking with despair, mouthing something through the barrier. I was sure it was the same thing she'd been trying to say for the last 10 minutes, I'm sorry, I love you, it was a mistake. But here's the thing, she wasn't crying because of me. She didn't cry over our marriage or over the decade we spent building a life together. No, she only cried because she was exposed, because she was glued to the truth and nothing could tear her away from it. It was her choice. Wives continued to tear their husbands apart. Kira was already pulling James's hair as hard as she could. Linda pushed Jack mercilessly, knocking everything down with her aggressive movements. Susan continued to punch Bob, not hard, but enough to make his body shudder. None of them even looked at Melanie with pity. She was where she deserved to be. I slowly backed away. That was enough for me. The anger that had gripped my stomach for the past few days was finally starting to cool. I did what needed to be done. Now I could just leave. Calm. Everything is over. I turned, taking one last look over my shoulder. Kira was tearing James to shreds, Linda was a hurricane of rage, Susan was crying but with sharp determination, and the tangled, disgusting bodies on the bed looked like pieces of a whimsical mosaic I had put together. I walked down the stairs, the sounds of shouting and fighting fading behind me with each step, my legs feeling lighter, as if a weight in my chest was falling in parts. Stopping in the hall, I breathed in the fresh night air that slowly seeped into the house from outside, then got into the car, stopped for a moment, and with one last look at this nightmarish house drove away without turning back. The next morning I filed for divorce without any hesitation. My lawyer's eyes widened as I laid before him a mountain of evidence, photos, videos, the whole sordid story. Jesus, John, he muttered, shaking his head. It's comprehensive. I shrugged. It had to be. The divorce procedure was quick and ruthless. Melanie didn't even try to deny it. How could she when her betrayal was publicized in those photos and videos? In the end, she left with nothing, no house, no money, only her clothes and the weight of her decisions. James, Jack and Bob. Their marriages also fell apart. Kira, Linda and Susan wasted no time and also filed for divorce. The last thing I heard was that the guys were living in their cars, and everyone in town was turning their backs on them. Their reputations were destroyed, their lives turned into ruins. Our small town was buzzing with gossip. Wherever I went, I felt eyes on me, heard whispers, "Have you heard of John's wife? I can't believe Melanie could do that. These men should be ashamed of themselves." I held my head high and ignored it all. Let them talk. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Melanie tried to call several times. I blocked her number. She once came to the house, with mascara smeared on her face, begging for forgiveness. I closed the door in front of her.